You're standing around a fire. It's 50,000 BC. The sun just went down. There's no Netflix. There's no phone. There's no existential dread about your inbox. There's just you, the flames, and the thick choking smoke curling directly into your face. And somewhere at some point, one of your ancestors looked at that smoke and thought, wait, what if I did that on purpose? This is the story of how humans discovered smoking. Not cigarettes. Not cigars. Not the guy outside the office who you always end up talking to for too long. We're talking about the very first time a human being intentionally inhaled something burning, and why that might be one of the oldest habits our species has ever had. Because here's the thing nobody tells you. Smoking doesn't start with tobacco. It doesn't start with colonial trade routes or Native American ceremonies or even agriculture. The desire to inhale smoke might be hardwired into us on a level so deep it predates civilization entirely. And the evidence for this is genuinely insane. Let's start with fire. Because before you can smoke anything, you need fire. And fire has been part of the human story for a very, very long time. The oldest confirmed evidence of controlled fire use by our ancestors dates back roughly 1 million years, from a site called Wonder Work Cave in South Africa. Archaeologists found burnt plant ash and charred bone. Not the result of a wildfire, but of a sustained, contained fire, used deliberately inside a cave. Now, 1 million years ago, we weren't even Homo sapiens yet. That was Homo erectus. Our earlier cousin, with a smaller brain, a heavier brow, and absolutely zero interest in being told what to do with it. They sat around fires just like we do. They cooked. They stayed warm. They huddled together in the dark. And they breathed smoke. Every single day for hundreds of thousands of years, every human and pre-human ancestor who sat near a fire inhaled smoke. It was unavoidable. It was constant. It was basically the original air quality situation, and nobody had an app to check it. But here's where it gets interesting. Some of that smoke wasn't just wood smoke. When you burn organic matter, you don't just get carbon dioxide and water vapor. You get a cocktail of compounds depending on what you're burning. Some plants, when combusted, release psychoactive chemicals. Alkaloids, terpenes, compounds that interact with the human nervous system in ways that are, let's say, noticeable. In other words, some of our ancestors were absolutely accidentally getting high around the campfire, and they had no idea why they felt amazing. This isn't a fringe theory. Researchers have proposed for decades that early humans living in forested environments would have regularly been exposed to the smoke of psychoactive plants like cannabis, Nicotiana species, and various entheogens that grow naturally across Africa, Europe, and Asia. The human brain, it turns out, has receptors that respond to cannabinoids. These receptors didn't evolve because of cannabis. They're part of our endocannabinoid system, which regulates everything from mood to memory to appetite. But the fact that they exist means that when a human first inhaled smoke from a burning cannabis plant, their brain wasn't confused. Their brain was like, oh, hello, I've been waiting for you. And that moment, that first accidental hit of psychoactive smoke around a prehistoric campfire, might be the true origin of smoking. Not a decision, not a plan, just a very pleasant accident, repeated enough times that someone eventually thought to recreate it on purpose. Think about that for a second. The entire multi-trillion-dollar global tobacco industry, the centuries of ritual, the shamanic traditions, the medical practices, the social customs, all of it may have started because a tired hunter sat downwind of the wrong bush and had a really unexpectedly great evening. History is sometimes beautiful in the most absurd ways. Now here's where we have to be careful about timelines, because ancient humans smoked things, and ancient humans intentionally cultivated things to smoke are very different claims. Let's talk about what the archaeology actually tells us. The oldest direct evidence of intentional cannabis use, meaning burned cannabis seeds found in a context suggesting deliberate inhalation, comes from a burial site in the Pamir Mountains of Central Asia, dating to around 500 BC. Excavators found wooden braziers containing stones that had been superheated, alongside residue from cannabis plants with unusually high THC content. This wasn't wild cannabis used for rope or seeds. This was the good stuff, and it was placed directly in a ritual burial context, 500 BC. That's roughly 2,500 years ago. But here's the question that should be sitting in the back of your mind. Does the absence of older physical evidence mean it didn't happen earlier, or does it just mean we haven't found it yet? Because organic material, seeds, leaves, plant fiber, almost never survives thousands of years in the ground. We find stone tools from 3 million years ago because stone is basically indestructible, but a wooden pipe filled with dried herbs? That's gone in a few centuries under normal burial conditions. A leather pouch of cannabis? Dissolved back into the earth long before any archaeologist ever showed up with a trowel. So the absence of evidence, in this case, is absolutely not the evidence of absence. There is also the Herodotus problem. Herodotus, the ancient Greek historian writing in the 5th century BC, described in remarkable detail the Scythians, a nomadic people from the Eurasian steppe, performing what he called a vapor bath. They would set up small enclosed tents, heat stones until they glowed, and throw hemp seeds onto those stones, then sit inside the tent inhaling the smoke, and, as Herodotus wrote, howling with pleasure. For centuries historians assumed he was exaggerating or misunderstanding what he saw. Then archaeologists started excavating Scythian burial mounds and finding, you guessed it, bronze braziers, heated stones, and hemp residue. Exactly what Herodotus described. The man was just reporting what he saw. He wasn't embellishing. He was, if anything, underselling it. Let's talk about tobacco because it's the one most people actually associate with smoking. Tobacco is a plant in the genus Nicotiana and it's native to the Americas. That matters enormously because it means tobacco was completely unknown to Old World civilizations, Europe, Africa, Asia, until contact with the Americas in the late 15th century. When European explorers arrived in the Caribbean in 1492, they immediately noticed indigenous people doing something strange. Columbus himself wrote in his journal about seeing men and women walking around with small glowing sticks, inhaling the smoke from burning dried leaves, and letting it back out through their noses and mouths. His crew was baffled. His crew also, within weeks, tried it themselves. Because of course they did. But tobacco use in the Americas is far, far older than 1492. Archaeological evidence of tobacco, specifically chemical residues in ancient pipes, has been found dating back to at least 3,500 years ago in the southeastern United States. Some researchers believe it could go back considerably further. Possibly 10,000 years or more, tied to the development of cultivation in the Amazon basin. And here's the thing about tobacco in ancient America. It was not recreational. Not primarily. It was sacred. Tobacco was used in healing rituals, in communication with the spirit world, in binding agreements between tribes. Blowing smoke on someone was an act of blessing, of connection, of respect. A shaman who smoked wasn't having a casual cigarette break. He was opening a channel between the living and the divine. The smoke itself was considered a living carrier, a messenger that traveled between worlds, carrying prayers upward, and bringing visions downward. That framing matters. It explains why tobacco use was so disciplined, so ritualized, so controlled in many indigenous cultures for thousands of years. When something is sacred, you treat it with reverence. You don't chain smoke it while watching TV. The idea of tobacco as a casual everyday habit, something you do on a lunch break or while waiting for the bus, is an almost entirely European invention, and a fairly recent one at that. Now let's go back even further, because there's a piece of this story that most people have never heard, and it might be the oldest evidence of intentional smoking in the entire archaeological record. In 2019, researchers made a remarkable discovery at a site in the Great Salt Lake Desert in Utah. They found a hearth, a cooking and heating fire, roughly 12,000 years old, containing the seeds of Nicotiana attenuata, a wild tobacco species native to North America. These weren't seeds that had accidentally blown into the fire. They were concentrated, present in a way that suggested deliberate placement. The site predates any known pottery or pipe artifacts in the region by thousands of years. This pushed back the possible timeline of tobacco use in the Americas by a significant margin. And it raised a genuinely fascinating question. If people were throwing tobacco into fires 12,000 years ago, whether to inhale the smoke or for ritual purposes or both, what were people in other parts of the world doing with their local psychoactive plants at the same time? Because 12,000 years ago, humans were everywhere. They were in Africa, in Asia, in Europe, in Australia. And the human desire to alter consciousness? To seek out altered mental states? That is not an American phenomenon. That is a human phenomenon. Let me throw something at you that might sound wild, but is taken seriously by respected anthropologists. The intoxication hypothesis. The basic argument goes like this. Across virtually every human culture ever documented, people have sought out ways to alter their consciousness. They've drunk fermented beverages, eaten psychedelic mushrooms, inhaled smoke, chewed plant leaves, and swallowed seeds. This behavior is so universal, so persistent, and so independent across cultures that some researchers believe it isn't accidental. Ronald Siegel, a psychopharmacologist at UCLA, proposed in the 1980s that the pursuit of intoxication is a fourth drive, alongside hunger, thirst, and sex, that is biologically embedded in animal behavior, not just human behavior. Elephants deliberately seek out fermented marula fruit. Reindeer in Siberia have been observed eating Amanita muscaria mushrooms and then drinking the urine of other reindeer who ate the mushrooms, because the psychoactive compounds pass through intact. Reindeer doing drug recycling in Siberia. Honestly, respect. The point is, if the drive to alter consciousness is this deep and this old, it's entirely reasonable to propose that early humans, long before they domesticated any plant, long before they had pottery or pipes or any of the tools we normally associate with smoking, were deliberately exposing themselves to smoke from psychoactive plants because they had learned through experience that it changed something in their mind. Maybe they burned those plants intentionally during rituals. Maybe they selected campsites near specific plants for exactly this reason. Maybe they learned which smoke made you feel good, and which made you feel like you were dying, which with some plants is a distinction that kills you once before you figure it out. This is trial and error, prehistoric style. Very high stakes. Occasionally, literally fatal. But the ones who survived? They remembered. They told others. They passed it down through generations of knowledge that never got written, but got lived. That's how most human knowledge worked for most of human history. Not libraries. Not schools. Lived experience, passed mouth to ear, around a fire, in the dark. Let's also talk about something that rarely comes up in this conversation. Smoking as medicine. Long before smoking was recreational, long before it was spiritual, it may have been medical. The Abirs Papyrus, one of the oldest known medical documents in the world, dates to ancient Egypt around 1550 BC. It describes treatments involving the inhalation of smoke from heated herbs, specifically for conditions affecting the throat and lungs. This is wildly counterintuitive from a modern perspective. You're telling me the ancient Egyptians treated lung problems by inhaling smoke? Yes. Yes, they were. And while that seems insane, it's worth noting that the specific herbs they used, including henbane and various aromatics, do have genuine pharmacological properties when inhaled. The ancient Greeks used fumigation, therapeutic smoke, regularly. Hippocrates, the guy you take an oath named after if you become a doctor, wrote about the inhalation of herbal vapors to treat diseases of the lungs and other conditions. The thinking wasn't crazy by the standards of the time. Smoke reaches the lungs directly, so if the plant has medicinal properties, delivering it via smoke makes a certain logical sense. The lungs as a delivery mechanism. Inhaled medicine. We still do this today, with asthma inhalers and anesthetic gases and nebulizers. The delivery method survived. The burning part, thankfully, mostly didn't. Ancient Indian Ayurvedic medicine, dating back over 3,000 years, describes a practice called dhumapana, literally smoke drinking, involving the inhalation of medicinal herbs through pipes. The texts describe specific plants, specific conditions, specific preparations. This wasn't casual or improvised. It was a sophisticated medical system with detailed protocols and centuries of refinement behind it. Across ancient China, ancient Mesopotamia, ancient Greece, ancient India, in virtually every early civilization on record, there is evidence of people inhaling smoke deliberately for therapeutic purposes as a recognized medical practice. Not because they were addicted, not because they thought it was cool, because it worked, or at least it worked sometimes, or at least it worked enough times that they kept doing it, and in a world without antibiotics, without surgery, without any of the tools modern medicine takes for granted, works sometimes, was a pretty meaningful bar to clear. There's another angle to this story that doesn't get enough attention, and it has to do with social bonding. Humans are deeply social animals. We evolved in groups, and group cohesion, the ability of a group to stay together, trust each other, act in coordination, was literally a matter of life and death for most of our evolutionary history. Isolated individuals died. Groups survived. Anything that enhanced social bonding had genuine survival value, and shared rituals, including shared consumption of psychoactive substances, are extraordinarily powerful tools for social cohesion. When a group of people undergo a shared altered experience together, it creates a sense of connection, of trust, of mutual understanding that is very hard to replicate any other way. Modern neuroscience has confirmed this. Shared rituals synchronize neural activity, increase trust, and deepen group identity in measurable, documented ways. So when a group of ancient humans sat together in a closed space, breathing in smoke from burning cannabis or other herbs, and collectively entered an altered state, that wasn't just recreational, that was social technology. That was how you built the kind of deep trust in group cohesion that let you go into dangerous situations together and come back alive. The ritual smoke circle wasn't just a party, it was infrastructure. Here's where we arrive at the uncomfortable part of the story. The transition from sacred smoke to casual habit is, historically, an absolute disaster. When tobacco arrived in Europe in the 16th century, it spread with a speed that should remind you of something. Within decades, smoking had gone from an exotic curiosity to a continental obsession. By the 1600s, tobacco was being traded globally. By the 1700s, snuff, powdered tobacco inhaled through the nose, was fashionable across European aristocracy. By the 1800s, cigars were everywhere. By the early 1900s, the industrially manufactured cigarette had been invented, making tobacco consumption cheaper, more convenient, and more addictive than anything that had come before. What had taken indigenous Americans thousands of years to incorporate into a measured, ritualistic, deeply cultural practice was, in the hands of European industrialists, turned into a mass-market consumer product within 4 centuries. The tobacco industry in the 20th century then spent decades and billions of dollars suppressing the evidence that cigarettes caused cancer. Evidence their own scientists had compiled internally. They marketed cigarettes to children. They hired doctors to endorse their products. They added chemical compounds specifically to make nicotine hit faster and harder, and leave the system more quickly, maximizing addiction. They turned something ancient and ritualistic and communal into a product specifically engineered to be as physically destructive and as financially extractive as possible. A shaman and a tobacco executive both worked with the same plant. They had almost nothing else in common. The gap between a shaman in 500 BC placing cannabis on hot stones in a ritual burial, and a tobacco company executive in 1960 signing off on marketing cigarettes to teenagers, in human history. Both involve smoke. Almost nothing else is the same. So when did ancient humans start smoking? The honest answer is, we don't know exactly. And we probably never will. The physical evidence takes us back 12,000 years with some confidence, and possibly much further with reasonable speculation. The behavioral drive that underlies smoking, the desire to alter consciousness, to share ritual experiences, to use inhaled substances as medicine, is almost certainly far older than any artifact we've found. It may be as old as fire itself. It may be as old as the cognitive leap that made us human in the first place. The ability to connect cause and effect, to look at a burning plant and think, last time that happened, I felt different. Let me do that again. That's not addiction. That's intelligence. What we do know is this. The behavior is extraordinarily old. It predates agriculture. It predates pottery. It predates every civilization you've ever learned about in school. What is absolutely clear is that by the time the historical record begins in every corner of the world where humans lived, they were already finding ways to put smoke into their bodies. The specific plants changed. The rituals changed. The purposes changed. But the behavior? The behavior was already ancient by the time anyone thought to write it down. There's something almost poetic about that. For all the things that separate modern humans from our ancestors, the technology, the medicine, the internet, the truly baffling amount of content we consume every day, there are these thin threads of continuity that run unbroken through 100,000 years of human experience. Fire. Smoke. Breath. The oldest humans sat around fires and breathed the same smoky air you'd smell at a bonfire tonight. Some of them, at some point, started paying attention to what that smoke was doing to them. And then they started choosing it. And then they started passing the choice down to their children and their children's children, and eventually to the Scythians howling with pleasure in their tents. And the Egyptian physicians prescribing henbane, and the Mayan shamans reading visions in the rising smoke, and the Taino people on a Caribbean beach watching confused Europeans try tobacco for the first time and cough until their eyes watered. Either way, next time you flip a light switch, or sit around a summer fire, or catch a whiff of wood smoke on a cold night, you're participating in something far older than you realize. You're doing what humans have always done. You're breathing.